Welcome, everybody. That was a great video, too. Nice to see some shots of these aircraft in action. Well, I'm Mark Millam with Flight Safety Foundation, an MC of our virtual BASS 2020 event. We had session 1 this morning. This is session 2, and we have 3 and 4 coming up tomorrow. I wish we all could be joined together under one roof, but we're glad you're here with us with BASS 2020, despite the conditions across the globe. Perhaps the numbers today, and it looks like we're over 250 in this afternoon's event, say a lot about just how resilient the business aviation community is. And I'd like to get back to you in just a moment to let you know more about how to engage with our speakers, moderators, and participate in today's poll. But right now, I'd like to introduce you to Flight Safety Foundation's President and CEO, Dr. Hassan. Hassan?
Thank you, Mark, and good afternoon. Greetings and welcome to Virtual BASS 2020, session number 2. Those that participated in session 1 this morning, welcome back. Good to have you back. A special greeting and welcome to Flight Safety Foundation members around the world. Hope everyone is safe and remains healthy as we deal with this COVID-19 pandemic crisis. This morning, we had a very informative session with the FAA Administrator, Steve Dixon, and Dana Schultz with NTSB. And we have a great program this afternoon with session 2. And to get underway, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over back to Mark.
Okay. So in today's event, it's so important to hear from everybody out there. I've just a few instructions as they did this morning, as well as the rest of our events. Well, number 1, as we go through this session, we encourage you to share your thoughts, questions, and comments using the question box in your control panel. You'll see a little bar on your control panel that says questions. And you can put anything in there. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll use that when we get to the point where we want to get some responses from our speakers. Number 2, we'll monitor the chat activity on that same control panel and reply as we're able to help you out if you've got any technical problems. There's always a chance you might not be the only one having or needing help, and we'd like to hear from you if it looks like things aren't working on your end. Number 3, when we conduct polls, we're going to use a special link that allows us to have you participate with a separate mobile device or a separate browser window. And in order to do that, you use the URL that's mentioned on this screen. So you might want to pull that out right away. Give it a shot to put that in on your mobile device or another browser. And it's pollev.com/majorwins156. And to give that a test, many of you that participated this morning, you probably know what I'm talking about, but we need to build on something that we've done previously. So let's start. In this morning's polling, we found out a lot about our audience, and we knew that our audience was often related to an operator, either commercial or business aviation. And we would like to find out a little bit more about that and whether or not you have experience currently working as today or in the past, either a pilot, a mechanic, a flight attendant, ground staff, ATC, and you can see the responses live as they come in. Also,
hey, Mark, you might want to share your PowerPoint.
Thank you for reminding me.
I was trying to participate in that, and I couldn't. Thank you, Mike.
So there it shows the polev.com major wins 156 is the URL if you haven't seen it before. And we've got a good cross-section of many of these choices, but very strong in terms of the pilot side. So I will lock the responses right now. If you haven't caught up and able to put that into a URL, don't give up. We've got a couple of other polls that we can still show and you can participate in. The next one we were wondering about. One of our speakers today is going to talk about fatigue, talk about lack of sleep and so forth, and what it does to our performance levels. And in that presentation, she may talk about what moderate and severe fatigue can be considered comparable to. And we'd like to know what your thoughts are on this in terms of how severe that might be. So go ahead and participate in this poll, and we'll wait till that presentation comes up to see what she has to say about it. I'm going to lock in our responses, and I'll go to one last poll. The Flight Safety Foundation has put out a well-being document, and you can answer more than once on this one. Select any or all of the items here. And we are wondering if you know what are the components of the FSF well-being document. Looks like it's still, results are still coming in. So we appreciate that and your responses. I'm going to lock this in, and then we've got it captured, and keep those things in mind as we go through our session today. And first up in our session 2, I'd like to introduce once again, she was in our original session, our chairman of the FSF Business Advisory Committee and CEO for Flight Start Solutions, Ms. Lisa Sassy. Lisa, would you join me?
Welcome back.
Welcome to you.
It was a productive morning. Hopefully everybody is ready for another session of informative information. The experts that we bring you this afternoon, it is my privilege to begin with Mr. Tom Anthony. Tom is the director of the world-renowned and certified Aviation Safety and Security Program at the University of Southern California. He's an instructor who shares his expertise in aviation safety management systems, aircraft accident investigations, and aviation security. Prior to his work at USC, Tom held significant safety positions with the FAA, consulted with ICAO, and the World Food Program on aviation safety and security. Tom is also a longtime member of the Flight Safety Foundation's Business Advisory Committee, where he has made considerable contributions to aviation safety and the industry. We look forward to this afternoon, and we look forward to your comments. Thank you. Tom?
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honor to be part of the Business Aviation Safety Committee and to work with you. And I look forward to being with all of you on the other side of this camera sometime next year.
Wonderful. Well, the three of us would like to talk a little bit about what's really, sort of behind this. And when things started to happen with the pandemic, and as airlines started to drastically change a lot of their operations. I remember getting a couple of different emails from some of the folks on our advisory committees saying, what can we do? And one of the people that I remember that had one of the greatest concerns was somebody from our European advisory committee, Pascal Kramer, and he's a pilot there. And he was seeing all of the changes that are about to happen in terms of reduction in operations and basically pretty much ceasing operations. And so he knew he wasn't going to be flying for very long, and felt like, boy, there's something that needs to be done. So he gathered up not only some replies and remarks from the Flight Safety Foundation and some of its senior leadership, but he got a couple of folks together from some of our other advisory committees and said, how can we help, and how can we get something out there so that people might know a little bit of what to do and what to plan for. Of course, a lot of the operations had already to shut down, but his thought and some of the other advisory committee members wanted to have at least some sort of guidance in, as you exercise your SMS programs and you do the sort of risk assessments for the massive changes that are underway. What are the things to think about? What are the hazards that might be involved? And then how do you quantify that in terms of risks and turn that into something you can have a positive influence on your organization? So they put together a draft of this pandemic, and they call it a non-medical operator safety aspects supplemental materials. And it's really not to claim any expertise in terms of all the medical advice, but to say, now that if you've got some information from the medical experts, what do you do with that? How do you apply it? And how do you integrate it with some of the risk assessments that you might be doing? So they broke that out into 3 sections. One, in terms of continuing operations. There's a lot of operations that still continue. Of course, the cargo segment of the world is flying, and there's a lot of difficulty in terms of just using enough cargo space to get everything done that needs to be done right now. There are folks that had reduction or complete cessation of flying, just because it didn't serve any purpose to put risk to passengers and crew members at all. And so there was complete shutdowns. A company I used to work for, Compass Operations, they just completely shut down and are out of the business. So we know that's happening too. And then they had a restoration section when we start to climb back and we start that recovery. And then on top of all that, once they've kind of completed this document, they tried to set up something that helps us to keep track of all the different things that they were suggesting. So Lisa, I know you were part of that.
Yes.
You were involved in several of our 3 times a week sessions. Some of the stuff out of that really spawned the idea of, hey, this is a big change for a lot of people. Ramped up their activities enormously to try to respond in terms of their own workload. Some people just sort of they end up being laid off or furloughed, and they're just sort of and both of them have tremendous risks in terms of how do you manage your own well-being, your mental health, anything like that. And I know Tom played a big part of that with the same sort of team as they conducted those creations. So I'd just like to get some initial reactions from both of you in terms of your work experience with that and how that went. What kinds of things are you thinking of right now? And where do you think we can continue to help?
So I think, it is what I'll give you a cliche. We don't know what we don't know until we're physically out there and starting to operate. There are going to be, as I said this morning, a great deal of unknowns. In the beginning, my immediate concern is complacency. A lot of time has gone by, and it's a matter of people coming up to speed and staying there and regaining confidence in a lot of ways. I think that the roadmap really has taken a practical approach at some things that might be obvious to us in a normal functioning world, but maybe not so obvious going through what we have in the past 2 months. I think it's going to be a step-by-step process. And remembering all of our training from the very beginning is going to be crucial as we go through that.
Yeah,
Thanks, Lisa.
thank you, Lisa, for introducing that. Complacency is a broad term, but I think it's important for us to think about this in terms of safety management systems, because this does represent the most significant threat and hazard to aviation that we have incurred in our lifetimes. And so with that in mind, if we think about a safety management system, this is a big change. This is a big change, and one of the significant elements of a safety management system is a change management process. So we would be derelict in our duties if we did not essentially, as organizations, conduct a thoroughgoing change management process to what's different about our operating environment. Well, we as people are going to be different coming back. Our passengers are going to bring with them different attitudes. So really, it would be hazardous for us to just go back and think that we're going to operate with the same set of hazards, with the same set of mitigations and SOPs. Probably requires a great deal of thought of what are the changes that we can anticipate.
Yes.
Good, thank you. Well, one other thing that sort of shaped why we wanted to do this session at BASS had to do with what we learned as a result of a previous Flight Safety Foundation webinar. And we put one together that really pulled together a few medical experts, one from ICAO, one from IATA, and one from an organization that is right in the middle of things in terms of collecting both reports from flight crews and operations with MedAir. So that was just done on April 15th, and that's only a couple of weeks ago. But during that event, we talked a lot about, how do airline crews remain healthy and safe, what's necessary to keep the aircraft and airport facilities sanitized, how do airlines and business aviation operators handle cases of COVID-19 amongst their crew, as well as while they're on any sort of layovers. And there was quite a bit that they mentioned in terms of previous preparations for a pandemic or an epidemic like this, and how this one is so drastically different from all the rest that maybe most people in their lifetimes have faced. So we did that. If you haven't seen it, it's probably worth going and taking a look at the YouTube on that. I know that ICAO is looking at ways that they can help to have standards developed that might guide some of the states around the world. That was, kind of the start of maybe a conversation that we felt like is going to continue as this crisis continues. And that's a little bit of why we put this particular session together. Either of you want to add anything to that? Kind of who our speakers are coming up. Any other sort of transitions as we get going?
Just acknowledgement for the team of individuals on the pandemic roadmap, extremely experienced and dedicated individuals that have really done a beautiful job. So I look forward to this afternoon as that will play into more of what we're discussing.
Great. Well, thanks both of you. Thanks for being part of the Business Advisory Committee. And thanks especially for your efforts as we sort of ramped up into something that is whole new territory. And I'll let you guys continue on. I'll go into the background. I'll be ready to help when it comes to the question and answer period, and let you guys continue.
Thank you, Mark. This afternoon's presentation is about wellness, and it's about well-being. And it realizes that we as aviation safety professionals are at the center of a return to service and of the well-being of and the safety of the system. So joining me this morning will be Dr. Rajni Walia and Dr. Gary Toups. And so we will all be addressing well-being and health from a different perspective. Dr. Rajni Walia will go first. She is a principal consultant with the DEKRA company. She focuses on the interaction and the well-being between the brain, people and their environment, and technology, and brain-centric reliability. Specifically talking today about sleep and fatigue. And you know, the issue of sleep and fatigue has been with us in aviation for decades, and probably the most interesting and well-documented example occurred many decades ago on a flight across the Atlantic Ocean. And the pilot was flying through some fog. He was having some trouble staying awake, and he looked back to the back of the airplane and he saw some phantoms, saw some ghosts, and he realized that to himself that these were actually friendly and non-threatening ghosts. So he pressed on. That was at the 21-hour mark of the 33.5-hour flight from New York to Paris by Charles Lindbergh. And if you want to hear it in Lindbergh's own words, you'll be able to see it in his book, The Spirit of St. Louis. So joining us on the issue of fatigue and sleep first, Dr. Rajni Walia.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to everyone for having me this afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be with you guys. And we couldn't make it under one roof, but we've all made it in one forum. So it's fantastic that you got that this kind of opportunity has been put together. And it's a real pleasure of mine to talk about fatigue and the hidden consequences it has on every organization. Right now, we're in an unprecedented time with this pandemic. So I just wanted to talk about what sleep deprivation does to our performance. And I can see I'm joined by a really smart group, because you guys absolutely got the question right on the poll question around sleep and blood alcohol level. So if you can take it to the next slide, please. All right, so what I thought I'd start off with is some research. You can bring up all of the 3 points on the screen. So what we know from a lot of research is that the #1 sort of connection or reason why this has become such an issue is because human error is often linked to performance. So if we can bring up all the points on the slide, please.
1 second.
Yeah, no problem. So cognitive fatigue is what I'm going to be looking at. And cognitive fatigue is the lack of deep sleep that we have over a certain period of time. And what we know about cognitive fatigue is it is a known precursor. So when we look at serious injuries and fatalities across industries, my organization does a lot of work within aviation, and we do a lot of work within aviation companies. And what we know is that cognitive fatigue, the lack of deep sleep, over time is a known precursor to very significant injuries and fatalities. The second thing that we know is that from a sleep deprivation perspective, the less and less that we sleep, the more likely that we're at the risk of an error. So you can see there's a 2 to 5 times risk of error. So 2 times risk of error comes about if we sleep less than 6.5 hours of sleep, 5.5 hours or less, and you're down to 5 times the risk of making an error at some point during your work. And that error could be small and non-significant, or it could be very large and leading to that first bullet point, which is it really would cause a serious injury or fatality. The last bullet point on this slide is linked to blood alcohol levels. Now, we know from the research that's out there that moderate to severe fatigue is comparable to 0.4 to 0.12 blood alcohol levels. Now, this is a real struggle for me in working as a safety consultant. I talk to companies and all the time, and they tell me, well, look, we wouldn't ever allow people to come to work drunk. We wouldn't ever allow. We test for blood alcohol levels. We test for all of these things. So that's just would not even occur in our organization. Well, what I go then and ask them is, well, show me how long people work, how many consecutive days people work. Show me overtime. Show me the length of time that you have between shifts and whether they go from days to nights, nights to days. And then that really does tell me how serious they are. Because if you look at this, essentially what people are doing is they're being allowed to come to work fatigued. But it's the same as being allowed to come to work drunk. And if you're not allowing, or organizations don't allow people to come to work drunk, then why do they allow people to come to work fatigued? Now, what we know from neuroimaging, you can go to the next slide, please, is that if you look at an fMRI, and look at a rested brain versus a sleep-deprived brain, what you'll be able to see is within one 24-hour period, you'll be able to see quite significant change to the functionality, to the amount of activity that's actually occurring in the brain. So you can bring both of them up, please. So on the rested side, you can see an individual who has gotten the right amount of deep sleep. You can see there all the neural activity that is occurring. The red is in effect blood flow that is happening. And a lot of blood flow is happening right in the front of the brain, which is where the prefrontal cortex lies. And that is where you're doing all your executive functioning, your cognitive functioning is really, the communication is happening there. So your thought process and all of that communication is going to the prefrontal cortex. In a sleep-deprived brain, this is just the same individual sleep-deprived over one 24-hour period, and you can see there's quite significant blood loss already, blood activity happening. So in terms of the connections that are happening within the brain, when somebody is sleep-deprived, just one 24-hour period, you can see how much it does impact upon their behavior and upon the brain. Now, the next slide, please. So you can see there, in addition to these kind of factors, there's a number of other things that come up and a number of other things that occur when somebody is fatigued. One is lowered reaction time, miscue, so we can bring all of those up, the decreased energy and alertness, so people are slower to respond. Generally, they're more irritable, more moodiness comes in, anxiety comes in, poor reasoning comes in. The reason why, again, is because the activity, the blood flow is not going to the prefrontal cortex, and people are not thinking rationally. When someone is sleep deprived, you're thinking about your short-term gain and what will get you the response when you need it. Visual issues, so failing to see stuff right before their eyes, and poor perception. What we also know happens when people are fatigued is short-term memory dysfunction, so they tend to be more forgetful, tend to forget whether they've done a specific task today or whether they did that yesterday, which comes in with the time disorientation. And most significantly is the slower reaction time and the link to a microsleep. So what the brain is very, very good at doing is, if it doesn't get good quality sleep and enough sleep, it will send the brain right into a microsleep, which will put you right to a deep sleep and try to recover and try to recoup, because that's its way to survive. Now, what can organizations do? We can bring up the next slide. So there's a number of things that organizations can do to really control for this, and this is kind of like the call to action. So align on risk tolerance. So what is every company should define what it is and how much they're going to allow in terms of overtime, how much they're going to allow in terms of shift work. What would be there's now, sleep studies that are done, sleep rooms in a lot of organizations. So those would be things that the organization needs to align on. Fatigue policies and practices, believe it or not, a lot of organizations still do not have these implemented. And they might have a policy for testing for different levels of drugs and stuff, but they don't have a policy for fatigue, which is astonishing. So fatigue risk reduction training at all levels, which is really educating people on how to manage sleep and how to manage good quality sleep, as well as managing shift work, which tends not to be for everyone. Individual fatigue risk assessment. So by the way of wearables and different types of evaluation. So we typically suggest to organizations to do assessments on people. What we know about fatigue is that we ourselves are very poor we're very poor at judging our own fatigue levels. In fact, we often can't recognize our own dysfunction. So having a wearable of some sort that will tell you when your alertness is starting to go down, well then and having an organization really start to look at that is really what people should be doing now. And I know, in my organization, we look at this kind of stuff, and it's tell us quite a lot. Event learning, incident reviews. I do a lot of incident investigations, and I often find that precursors or information dealing with fatigue is what's often missing. There's very little detail on the length of time somebody has worked. There's very little detail on even what kind of tasks they'd be doing. So that kind of information is typically missing. So these are all of the things that organizations should be doing if they really want to take and address fatigue, which is a serious concern. In this pandemic, sleep is one of the things that we're absolutely not probably getting enough of. There's a lot of worry, there's a lot of uncertainty, especially in aviation, what's going to happen, what's return to work going to look like. So when all of that is occurring, and and factoring in other research which says that 38 to 53% of people worldwide suffer from moderate to severe sleep deprivation, these challenges are very real. So it is critical that organizations do something and implement organizational defenses, and these are just some of them. And we work with a lot of organizations to really get them to get a good understanding of what fatigue does and how it impacts us all. All right. So if I'm happy to answer any questions. I believe we have Q&A at the end, but if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them and take them. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Walia. I think the point that we really want to underscore is that, as Dr. Walia said, we are very poor judges of how impaired we are with fatigue. So think of yourself. You've been to the bowling alley, had a great time, had maybe 4 beers, and it's time to go home. And your buddy goes to you and he says, "Hey, how you feeling? You okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay. How about you want me to call an Uber for you or a taxi?" "No, I'm okay. I'm okay." And we are very poor judges of our amount of impairment from alcohol, and the same thing is true with our impairment fatigue. One of the things that happens, and I know that the Dr. Walia is completely aware of this, is that the brain shuts down a part at a time. When we are fatigued, it'll shut down different parts, and we're not aware of it. So thank you, Dr. Walia, for that very useful presentation. I'm up next, and as Mark said, this next presentation introduces to you a tool. It was a tool that was developed for all of us in aviation safety and aviation professionals. And as you see from this graphic here, we've tried to get everybody in here, all the different lines of business and disciplines here. We've got the pilots, we've got the ground crew, we've got everybody that is being influenced by this COVID-19 pandemic, which really represents an unprecedented level of threat to us as aviation safety practitioners and professionals. So this is a tool. This is a tool that we have developed for you. It's available on the Flight Safety Foundation website under Tools and COVID. But what's different about it, I think, from all the documents that I've worked on, is it is an approachable document. It's easy to use. You can pick it up and you can put it down, and it's to be used sort of like a quick reference handbook. And it, again, as I said, it's right there on the Flight Safety Foundation website. In addition to being approachable, I would say it's even friendly. So this graphic that we're looking at right now is a good example of how it is presented, and it's an easy, friendly, approachable document. That being said, it doesn't mean it does not lack, or that it lacks academic rigor. It was based upon a study that was done by Trinity College in Dublin, in which over 1,000 aviation professionals were interviewed, and their information was provided into this study. It forms the basis for this document that we have presented for you. So it really starts with, well-being starts with self, and it starts with these three questions to get the ball rolling. How am I feeling? How am I coping? And what can I do for myself and others? This gets us started on a journey. And that journey involves us as individuals, our mind, our body, and our social our social aspects of ourselves as an individual. But as we say this, as we see from this graphic, it's not all downhill, and that we have different influences that come to bear upon us as we go through this journey. So the objective, the goal is resilience. The goal is resilience, our ability to meet challenges, to change, and this will be a time of substantial change. The ultimate job is for us to return to work in a state of well-being, of healthiness, and be able to do our jobs well and safely. So if we look at ourselves here in the middle of this graphic, we have ourself as a mind and a body and social, and but around us, having an influence on us, is our family, our community, and our work life. And we all recognize that all three of these influences have a bearing and a pull and a tug on us as our body and our mind and our social aspect. Now, in order to manage this, we have identified 6 different factors, and of those, we have stress and anxiety, we have sleep, relationships, exercise, activities, and diet. All these elements here we need to manage. First of all, we need to be knowledgeable about them and to be able to identify them. And once we've identified them, then we can manage them. So again, relationships, stress, sleep. I would bring your attention to the fact that the diet segment does not illustrate a pizza. So in addition to a journey, it is a cycle. It is a process of becoming. And from my perspective as a safety management specialist, safety management system specialist, it's sort of like safety in that you have to recognize that you're never going to get there, but the only way that you will remain safe is striving to be safer at all times. So it is a process of becoming. The ideal end product is that as we work through this cycle, we can answer those questions of how am I feeling, how am I coping, and what can I do for myself and others. And we can answer them with the answers, well, I'm feeling pretty good, and I'm doing pretty well, and thank you very much. What can I do for you? So thank you for the Flight Safety Foundation for allowing us to put this and to work on this product here. those are the three starting places. If you can ask those questions of yourself, then you can use this document that is available on the Flight Safety Foundation website there. And I think you can, each one of us can find ourselves in that lineup of individuals there under the COVID-19 toolkits. So thank you for your attention. This is available for everybody, and it's a very useful, approachable, and friendly tool. So the third presenter in this segment is Dr. Gary Toups. And as I was talking with Lisa yesterday, she said, you know, Dr. Toups is really, his time is extremely valuable. He is hard to get to participate with us. He is a sought after individual. And I said, well, I know that. I know he's a military pilot, and he is a physician. He is a military physician. He is an expert on the hyperbaric chamber. She said, yeah, that's him. It's really hard to get. She said, he bats and he feels and he runs the bases. So I said, oh, okay, I get it. He's our Brooks Robinson for the afternoon. So with that in mind, Dr. Gary, we've got you in the batting number 3 in the bottom of the first. Dr. Gary Toups.
Thank you for the intro, Tom. Hope I can kind of live up to some of that. So I'm coming to you from from beautiful downtown Rochester in a very austere office, which is not my normal one. So it's a little drab back there. Apologize for that. No airplane pictures or anything. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about COVID-19 in the sense of FAA medicals. I understand you had a session with the FAA this morning, so if I'm going over ground that's already been plowed, then I apologize, but I'm going to basically talk about things from the AME standpoint. I am a senior AME and a HIMSS AME here at the Mayo Clinic. And then I'm going to talk about pilot fatigue and medications, and some of the pitfalls and some of the things that can happen there. So next slide, please. Go to the next slide, please. There we go. Okay.
Yeah, it's a little slow.
Okay. All right. Okay. So as far as COVID-19 and its effect on basically my business right now, I am not seeing any pilots. Okay. No one's coming in for face-to-face evaluations. So the FAA did take some action, and back in March, I'm going to read this on another screen here, but they came out with a document that said FAA will not take legal enforcement action against any person serving as a required pilot, flight crew member, or flight engineer based on non-compliance with medical certificate duration standards when the expiration of the required medical occurs from March 31st, 2020 through June 30th, 2020. I thought the choice of wording was strange, that was not going to take legal enforcement action, which basically said, yes, your certificate is expired. However, we're not going to do anything about it. I heard that that created some havoc with employers and insurers and things like that. So I'm not sure where that's sitting right now. And this was only valid within the continental United, or within the bounds of the United States. Okay, and only if you expired before March 31st, 2020. If you expired before that, this did not apply to you. They didn't really talk about special issuance. They came down with some additional guidance that said that addressed people working for overseas, working on pilots flying overseas. And let's see, so it basically, someone applied, a couple of groups applied, and they were granted exemption for pilots working for a Part 119 certificate holder who submitted a letter of intent, so it's not automatic. And this applies to pilots operating outside of the US under a Part 121 or Part 135, so either scheduled airlines or on demand or commuters. And what it said was this basically said that the pilots with medical certificates expiring March 31st through May 31st, 2020 have valid certificates until June 30th, 2020. So that sounds like an extension to me.
Mhm.
It's a bit confusing. You know, as far as how to apply this, again, I'm not sure. Until pilots, I expect there to be a surge of pilots coming to my door sometime around mid to late June. But right now, I hardly ever see one. I might, you know, talk to them on the patient portal here at Mayo, but they're not coming here for their medicals. All right, and so again, it doesn't really address the concept of special issuances and if there's any testing that you had coming up for that. As far as I know, an FAA medical, an FAA 8508 still has to be a face-to-face. It has to be in person. It cannot. A physical exam has to be done, so it can't be done via telemedicine. That being said, if you are in the HIMSS program, and for those of you who don't know, the HIMSS program is for people with substance or alcohol abuse issues or certain mental health issues that are on certain medications. If those people need to, a lot of times those people have to attend regular meetings like AA or something like that. They are allowing them to do it via Zoom or other teleconference resources. So, but you have to document very well. There might be some relief on some of this other stuff that doesn't require physical exam, but again, we're having to ask the FAA on a one-to-one basis for those. So that's where it sits. I'm kind of chomping at the bit to start seeing pilots again sometime soon. We are soon to be opening up for face-to-face encounters. Okay, you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, now I'm going to talk about fatigue and and I'm going to address medications. I got the duty and rest guidelines for business aviation from the Flight Safety Foundation, which is dated, I think, 2014. Very well done. The old safety guy in me, I was an Air Force safety officer for a number of years back when I was a pilot, and really thought that this was well done. And what it does is it appropriately addresses duty and rest scheduling from the operational, the administrative standpoint. There's no need for a doctor to be involved in any of this. In fact, there's no mention of medications or stimulants or anything like that. And the bedrock of your safety program and your pilot fatigue program needs to be operationally oriented and not medically oriented, obviously. And if you're doing something else, you're doing it wrong. So I really applaud this document. I thought it was very well done. So that being said, I'm going to move on to things that are not mentioned in that document, and I'm going to talk about medications. First, I'm going to talk about some over-the-counter medications or things that are readily available. And it says there, yeah, go back to the previous slide, please.
I'm sorry, got ahead of you.
Yeah, it's okay. I had to kind of jam these together. And there we go. Non-prescription medications. The first one I called them downers, and then the second part we call them uppers. But in other words, the things that help you go to sleep. I'm going to tackle alcohol first. If you're using alcohol routinely as a sleep agent, please don't do that. Alcohol may help you induce sleep, but it gives you very poor quality sleep. You awaken early and frequently, and the quality of sleep that you get is not very good. The chronic use of alcohol as a sleep-inducing agent will actually induce more chronic fatigue. So you really want to stay away from it for that purpose. I'm not, I'm not a teetotaler myself, but this is something that's been known for a long time. And then there's those pesky FAA rules about 8 hours bottle to throttle, or 8 hours minimum has to elapse between drinking an alcoholic beverage and piloting an aircraft or flying an air vehicle. And also there is a blood alcohol content level of 0.4, half of what most of the nation recognizes as drunk driving. And quite honestly, if you're routinely flying up to that level, you may be seeing me as a HIMSS AME, which I'm a nice guy and everything, and I do my best for you, but you don't want to be in that program. Believe me, you really don't. Okay, so again, alcohol, not a good idea. Next up is melatonin. Melatonin is a naturally occurring substance. It's made by the pineal gland in the brain. The levels of melatonin wax and wane during the day, and those levels influence drowsiness and sleep. And so it was discovered a while back that by giving exogenous or additional levels of melatonin and influencing those levels, maybe this could and does influence our ability to sleep. Part of the problem with melatonin is, yes, it is a naturally occurring substance, but I like to tell people it's not a placebo. It has real effects, and it's not a panacea. It doesn't fix everything, and it has different effects on different people. The dosing is really kind of hard to pin down. Most people nowadays think that lower dosing on the order of 0.1 to 0.5 milligrams, maybe 2 to 3 hours before you try to sleep, are much better than the higher doses that are available in commercially available preparations. Really, it's hard to find anything less than 1 milligram. So really, you want to, if you're using it, you'd want to break one in half and take that at the most. 10 milligrams is probably way too high. You're really exposing yourself to more of the adverse effects. The FAA recognizes that melatonin does have real effects, and they give a warning that you're not to fly for 24 hours after taking melatonin. The military, the United States Air Force, does not in any way, shape, or form allow pilots to fly operationally on melatonin. It is a prohibited drug, and that's because it lists the side effects as mild depression, nightmares, and drowsiness. So melatonin may be helpful to some, but definitely not for everyone. So be careful using it, and definitely don't take those mega doses of it. They're either wasted or they don't have the effect that you want it to have. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a throat clearing problem today. Okay, moving on to the stimulants that are over the counter. Caffeine, it's still in the previous slide, I'm sorry. Caffeine is a stimulant that's probably been around as long as human beings have been around in one way, shape, or form. People have been drinking teas and various other things and consuming things that have caffeine in them for a long, long time. What's a normal dose of caffeine and how should we use it? I'm going to say that a normal dose of caffeine is what's in a cup of coffee, brewed coffee, which is about 100 milligrams. So 1 or 2 cups of coffee, 1 to 200 milligrams. The effect takes about 15 to 30 minutes to take effect. So when should you target your caffeine use during a flight? Well, don't slug your grande latte just before you start your final approach. You want to do it up at altitude before you start briefing your approach and start your letdown, so that it's on board for that 30 minutes, and now you're more awake for the final approach and the landing. Remember that after about 300 to 500 milligrams per day, it's really not any more effective. All you are doing is adding up the adverse effects of caffeine, and there are several. Caffeine can contribute to heart palpitations and heart arrhythmias. In fact, sometimes people who are having palpitations, we say stop the caffeine, and the palpitations stop altogether. So that's one of the first things we tell people to do. It does help alertness. But it can also cause some jitteriness, and down the road, if you drink enough of it during the day, you can have trouble getting to sleep, which is a little counterproductive when you think about it. Okay, and the other thing I want you to be careful of is energy drinks. The primary energy-giving mechanism in there is caffeine. So they add caffeine to it, and then they put a lot of times a bunch of herbal extracts and things in there that also have caffeine that might not be reflected in the level that's shown on the container or the can. And sometimes it's just called their proprietary mix. So it may say it has 200 milligrams of caffeine, but when in fact it may be quite a bit more. There are some coffee preparations out there that are just absolutely chock full of the stuff. I'm looking at a list right now. There's one that I'm looking at called Biohazard ground coffee, and it has 928 milligrams in a 12-ounce serving. Oh my gosh! I mean, that would make my heart start fluttering right now. Another one called Death Wish. 728 milligrams per 12 ounces. That's completely insane. Don't do that. You know, that's all you're really not getting much of a bang for the buck there. And so I would not advise drinking those for flight. Remember that some people are more sensitive to caffeine than others. There are people who are kind of hyposensitive to caffeine, and they're probably the very fast metabolizers of the drug. The liver just takes it right out of circulation very quickly. There are people who are kind of normally sensitive, and then there are people who are very sensitive, where the least little bit of caffeine just drives them. They're probably the ones that have the palpitations and everything else. You can build up tolerance over time, but again, caffeine is something. It's typically pretty safe to use, but again, just be aware that there are some limits and there are some problems with it, with anything, honestly. Okay, moving on, and this is my last slide. And moving on to the prescription medications, and you see there that I put on there. That's area. I put on there a cautionary tale, and that is because, and I'm going to talk about both civilian and military use of prescription, mainly sedatives, and then military only use of stimulants, because the FAA will never ever, nor should you ever, want to use those for flying. There's no good reason, no good risk stratification level that would have you use prescription stimulants for flying either business or commercial aviation. FAA guidance on the use of prescription sedatives, they say that the use of sleep aids is a potential risk to aviation safety due to the effects of the sleep aid itself and the underlying condition. So if you have clinical chronic insomnia and you're taking a sleep medication, that's really disqualifying. You shouldn't be doing that. Now it goes on to say that occasional or limited use of sleep aids, prescription sleep aids, such as for circadian rhythm disruption for people on long-haul commercial flights, is allowable, okay? And but that daily or nightly use of sleep aids is not allowed, regardless of the underlying cause or reason. Let me tell you, FAA is very sensitive about these things, okay? I had a pilot that I worked on a special issuance for him for obstructive sleep apnea, which was great. It was we sent him for the sleep study. He did well on CPAP, great. But along with the special issuance, I had to send in the sleep study and the sleep doctor's note, and it had on his list of medications it had the medication, the sleep aid Sonata. Well, he only gave the guy one dose of this, and it was in his list of medications, and it wasn't anywhere else. And the FAA saw that, and they sent him a letter that said, we can't determine your eligibility. We need you to send us all of your pharmacy records, especially those that include the use of the medication Sonata. So I kind of rolled my eyes a bit, because I really should have caught it and put it in Block 6D, but I wrote a letter, said, and we got the pharmacy records, and I wrote a letter that said, hey, look, this is a one-time use for the sleep study. He is not on this on a regular basis, and they were okay with that. But they do look, and they're very sensitive to those medications being on any kind of a medication list. Nowadays, if a pilot uses it for long haul flights, I will always put that in Block 60 and explain that and say that I warned the airmen that there is a waiting time with the use of those medications. I'm looking at a chart right now that you can't see, but you can get it off the FAA site, and it goes over the 5 or 6 different medications in various forms. And the minimum waiting time is for the drug Sonata, which is 6 hours. The maximum time is for the drug Restoril or temazepam, which is 72 hours, 3 days after you take the stuff. And then there's Ambien. There are various forms of it, 24 hours. There is an oral spray form that is 48 hours. So just remember that there is a wait time, a mandatory wait time, after you use these prescription sleep medications. Okay, the military does use these for operational use only for circadian rhythm adjustment. If used for clinical insomnia, they're to be grounded. So that's pretty much the same. They only allow 3 medications: Restoril, Ambien, and Sonata. Much shorter wait times for the military. FAA's wait times are predicated on the half-life of the medication. The Air Force did its own studies, and to see how quickly someone could be alert after taking the medications. For instance, Restoril, the FAA requires 72 hours. The Air Force only requires 12. Okay. See, they can't use it for more than 7 consecutive days. And it's typically meant for when they're deploying to a forward location. They can use this for a couple of days in order to get there to adjust their circadian rhythm. But there are some problems with that. The pros of the sedatives are that they're readily available and inexpensive. They're reasonably effective. The results are usually predictable, although they can cause some unpredictable side effects, and we'll talk about those. One of the pros, especially for Sonata, is that the half-life is fairly short. The cons can be the half-life. Some of them are very long. All of these are controlled substances by the FDA. All of these sleep aids are FDA Schedule 4, which means there is a low but real possibility or probability of abuse of these medications, and it does happen. All of these can actually make you more sleepy or cause drowsiness after waking, especially sometimes even though you take the medication, you don't get to sleep, and it can actually make things worse for you. Some of the adverse effects of these medications are sleepwalking, sleep eating, where people go and clean out their refrigerator and don't remember doing it. Hallucinations. Have had people hallucinate on Ambien. Guy told me he heard music in the engine noise or something like that. Retrograde amnesia, which I call the dude where's my car syndrome, where you have memory loss for the time around where you took the medication. The dosing can be problematic, large versus small person, people who metabolize it faster, or male versus female. In the Air Force, we found that a 10 milligram dose of Ambien just caused too many adverse effects in most females. So we had to, they adjusted that down for the recommended initial dose for females of 5 milligrams as opposed to 10. The use of the drugs can lead to tolerance, dependence, and hoarding, and I've seen all of those. And then there's in the military, there's what I called mission creep and pilot expectations, where early on in my career, I never used these as a combat pilot, and I've flown some very long combat missions. We never used these back in the 80s and 90s when I was doing that kind of flying. Now they're much more popular, shall we say, and the pilots come in and say, hey doc, I'm going down to wherever, and it's maybe they changed maybe 4 or 5 time zones. Can you give me some Ambien? I think I'll look at it and I go, okay, and I give him a prescription for 2 Ambien. I figure it'll take a couple of days for him to straighten out, and he goes, oh wait, I can get 7. Well, what do you mean? Well, it says I can use it for 7 days. I said, but you don't have to use it for 7 days. And quite honestly, if you need more, just see the flight doc down there. But no, I don't think I need to give you 7. And that made me sometimes a little unpopular. But then I'm old and I scream, get off my lawn to kids and things like that. So. All right. So then moving on to the stimulants, and there, you see in red, it says stay away, stay very far away. You do not want to get involved in these, either in the administrative part or the using part. I hate these drugs. And the ones that the military uses are dextroamphetamine or dexedrine and modafinil or Provigil. They're used in in medicine to treat things like ADHD and narcolepsy, where people fall asleep. Well, obviously those things are not compatible with flying. So the condition and the medication, as far as the FAA concerned, you ain't gonna fly with this stuff. It's just not going to happen. Okay, and this happens every now and then. Sometimes we have a kid, or I say a kid, he's 18 years old, and he wants to go fly, but he's got a history of ADHD. And basically, the only way that that person is going to fly is if we can show that perhaps the diagnosis was in error and that they don't need this medication. It's a problem. So the use of this stuff in the military is predicated on the military operational need. And again, the risk assessment in the military is different than on the civilian side. You may have to pull strip alert and maybe have to save a platoon of Marines that are getting ground fire. Well, the risk of taking dextroamphetamine might be low enough, might be the risk benefit analysis may be enough that you will go ahead and take it then. Typical things that trigger the use are overwater sorties in single seat fighters over 8 hours where they have to hit a tanker several times. Again, the risk assessment there is I would give the guy dextroamphetamine or modafinil for that. Long duration sorties in bombers over 12 hours. I don't know. I've flown lots of them, and I personally never needed them, but then I'm an old guy. It is a pain to get these out to the pilots, and it's meant to be that way. It's not meant to be easy. It has to be requested by the operators. Then there's a whole lot of paperwork that has to be done by the doctors, who then prescribes it, who then hand carries it and hands it to the pilot, and gives them both verbal and written instructions. And then someone has to be on the other end to collect any unused pills, because we don't want dextroamphetamine just floating around out there. Okay, the pros of the Go pills. Again, this is only for military, they're effective, and the effects are predictable. They're cheap and readily available. They're easy to self-administer during flight. It's just pop a pill. Or in the case of our U-2 pilots who wear kind of a spacesuit, there's a feeding port, and they actually have a gel that they squirt through there into their mouth. It's that has a dextroamphetamine in it. So they're pretty easy. The cons are dexedrine is an FDA Schedule II drug. It has a high potential for abuse. So that's why it's so minutely supervised. Modafinil is a Schedule IV, so less potential for abuse. So it's very complicated to administer correctly. There's certainly a potential for misuse, hoarding, and diversion. And if you want to look up a story that was out last year about a U-2 pilot. And again, I don't know any firsthand details. I only saw the news report. It was a U-2 pilot who was basically hoarding his dextro gel and maybe some other things. I doubt that he's in the Air Force anymore, either that or he's breaking rocks in Leavenworth. But supposedly to avoid a drug test, he shaved all the hair on his body so he didn't have to provide hair for a drug test. Whatever. Not the kind of guy I want in my Air Force, so that's good. The frequent use of these, I've noticed over the years. Remember, I said I'm the get off my lawn guy. Frequent use of these has led to a more cavalier attitude by aviators over the years. We've been at war for a long time, and so the use of these drugs has gotten more and more frequent. And my own personal observation is back in my day, we just didn't use these as much. Nowadays, they're like, hey, I had a guy come, hey, doc, you're going to give me these really great drugs. And I said, you need to check the attitude. I don't appreciate it. And if you're going to talk like that, I'm not giving you anything. And again, sometimes they call me an old man. But you know, I had no problems taking it to a commander or something like that, because I just did not like that attitude. It just it's not something you want in any organization. And again, that's why you will never see this in the civilian world. Then finally, and this is my last point, and there are legal and liability issues with using these things. If you can look up on the internet, the 2002 Tarnak Farms friendly fire incident in Afghanistan, sadly, a U.S. Air Force F-16 dropped a 500-pound bomb on some friendly troops. Turned out they were sitting strip alert. They took off on a very demanding nighttime mission, and they were taking Go pills. They were taking dextroamphetamine in order to have the alertness to do this. Had a bad outcome. Don't know if the Go pills had anything to do with it, but it was certainly scrutinized in the review of that incident, and it would certainly be scrutinized in the review of any incident that had to do with any kind of a civilian pilot. So the bottom line is, you do not want this. You do not want to be involved in any kind of prescription stimulant medication. Okay, I've talked enough. I hope that was informative for you. And everyone stay safe and stay healthy in the throes of this COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, well, in the words of Red Barber, oh, doctor. I would also like to reinforce what Dr. Toups has said about melatonin. There was a very interesting study that was done about how melatonin reduces the maximal cone response in your retina. And the cones are what give you your visual acuity and your color acuity. So what you're doing, it naturally occurs as melanopsin in the retina. But if you're doing this, it really is retarding and diminishing the ability of you to see at your highest acuity. So that's another thing. So thank you for that excellent presentation. You are certainly going to win the award for the most forbidding and scary background. So I don't.
Sorry about that. Next time I'll have pretty airplanes.
Okay. Well, you had some really good photos there. Thank you. Mark, I believe that the schedule says that it is back to you at this point.
Well, let's invite back Rajni and Lisa, and let's get on with maybe some audience questions, or Lisa or Tom, if you have any questions to get us started. I'm ready with some audience questions when you guys are. And we got, your mic is muted, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you. Let's just start with an announcement that all of the presentations will be available to you from the foundation on YouTube. So you'll have that, certainly not the commentary that goes along with it for questions, but just a startup question, and we're great on time, so I know we have plenty of time for questions for everyone. First question was, as a result, with continued preoccupation and the possibility of crews, mechanics, flight attendants doing more in a restricted or reduced workforce, considering the psychological effects related to fatigue, and certainly this falls into medical as well as what Tom presented, what would you say is the biggest consideration? Question number one. And question number two, how can you, and this is rudimentary, but how can you identify your limitations?
Well, one of the things, let me just really address that, Lisa. Thank you for asking it, because that is what the well-being document is designed to do. And when you get into those areas of stress and anxiety, these specific subject matters, stress and anxiety, sleep activities, it tells you how to identify, self-identify if you're having a problem there. So I would start there and say that's what the purpose of that well-being document was. Excellent.
Dr. Rajni, Dr. Toups, anything to add?
There's that self-assessment checklist that's out there, the I am safe. There are lots of things that you can do to kind of take stock of yourself and be honest with yourself, especially in a time like this. You have to have the internal honesty to say I should not be bending wrenches on an airplane, in the current state I'm in, and you should have surround yourself with people who are willing to help you in that regard, and say, you know what, you don't look on the up and up today.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation as well, is really the surroundings, and are you working in an organization that actually wouldn't be afraid to tell you that you don't look like you're fit to work. And so really having that type of organization and having that type of surrounding would be extremely beneficial.
Excellent, thank you. Mark, do you want to start with some audience questions?
Sure. And thanks to Dr. Walia on the responses that you've already put in the system to some of our questions. So you might recognize some of these, but I think it might be worth a conversation. One person asks, should the industry emphasis be on controlling fatigue or controlling sleep?
Yeah, and I'm happy for Dr. Toups and Tom and Lisa for you guys to jump in. So my response really would be controlling fatigue. So fatigue, we know, has implications for, from a human performance perspective, from an injury perspective. So can we control one's sleep? We probably can. Can we control the fatigue by the way of the schedules that we put in place, by the way of the practices that we place? That's where I think the industry can be savvy and say, look, this is what we're going to allow and this is what we're not going to allow. In terms of the education piece and controlling sleep, I think what Dr. Toups did was great, because he alluded to some things like medicine. A lot of people don't know the effects of alcohol, and look, I'm just going to have one glass of wine and I should be fine to work. No, they don't know that. And I think so some of that comes with education, and then people can make better and more informed decisions from that.
Yeah. And as far as whether to, I'm sorry, but as far as whether to control sleep or fatigue, I mean, they're so interrelated. It's really difficult to. I would say at the grassroots level, at the organizational level, probably a little easier to in the work environment to work on the level of fatigue, and then to give the individual the certainly the opportunity to get a decent amount of sleep. So again, I think they're so interrelated. It's really hard to pull them apart.
I'd like to jump in on that too, Lisa. From personal experience, I can remember, and this relates to what Dr. Walia is doing, how powerful it was the first time I observed or listened to Dr. Greg Bendrick's presentation on sleep and the amount of impairment and the education, the way we deal with, I think, sleep is to educate what we're doing right now, how much effect it can have to our, how much impairment it can have to our abilities. And so I think the way you focus on sleep is by educating the people. It made a change in my life, absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you. Very helpful. Mark, next question.
For Gary Toups, what protocols are in place for conducting your FAA medical exam?
I'm going to try to. So, it's what protocol is in place here at the Mayo Clinic
I think that's what they're asking. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. We haven't. We're about to open up. We're coming up with patient screening protocols. There are masking protocols that everyone's going to have to be educated on, and we hope to start as soon as some of the restrictions on patient travel and that kind of thing. We'll start seeing patients hopefully within the next couple of weeks. And of course, during the exam, I can see that for most of the exam, we're both going to be masked unless I have to look up the nose or in the mouth and that kind of thing. But yes, it is affecting us. In other parts of my practice, we've actually started seeing patients again, both in consultation and for treatment procedures in the hyperbaric chamber. And it's a team effort, again, from the people out at the desk who are helping to get the patients educated and screened and everything else. It's going to be a little bit more complicated. It's not just going to be people walk up to the desk and then go through the door. There's going to be a lot of people being escorted around, making sure that their hands are sanitized and their masks are on, things like that. And we're still putting the dotting the I's and crossing the T's, but pretty soon we should be opening up.
Okay.
Cool. Gary, another one. Somebody's asking, we do long haul flights, usually 12 to 15 hours, 3 pilots, and utilize our crew rest quarters with a preset rest schedules. Rest periods can be an hour and 30 minutes, 3 hours. It's hard to force myself to sleep during rest periods. Is there anything more tame than melatonin to help get relaxed for this short period of time?
Yeah, nothing that I'm aware of that the FAA would approve of. I mean, some of the I didn't even go over some of the over-the-counter sleep aids like diphenhydramine or Benadryl. That one is a big no-no as far as using it during or just before flight. There's a 30-hour wait after that medication. So unfortunately, I mean, you're stuck with sleep hygiene measures, which is try to get as quiet and dark an area as you can, realizing that may be difficult on an aircraft. Don't don't try to fall asleep after watching the screen on your iPad. The blues in there tend to interrupt the ability to sleep. So again, the main thing is, as much as you can, try to adhere to good sleep hygiene measures.
Back to Dr. Walia. How accurate are reaction tests in measuring level of fatigue?
Reaction tests have come a long way from when they first started. I guess the response that I had already put in is that they have to be complemented. So reaction tests, you could measure somebody's reaction time in terms of when they respond, but it kind of goes beyond that. So that's part of it, is the reaction times. I think it has gotten better over the years in terms of its accuracy, but what I was saying is that you have to kind of look at what an individual is doing. So what's the mental loading and what's the physical loading in terms of the work that they're doing? And that would have an impact on whether they can perform. So certain things, I mean, I know if you're flying an aircraft, for example, your reaction time needs to be pretty at its optimal level. So it depends on the kind of work that you need to do and the reaction times. And I think you kind of have to factor all of those things in.
This is for anybody, and I think it's a tough question, but it relates back to our pandemic document. How to cope with sleep deprivation during flight operations due just to the stress of COVID-19? How can operators update their SMS to adapt it to this new reality? Any thoughts?
It's difficult. I mean, I think given all of the uncertainty that comes with the pandemic, I think that what we can do is some of the things that Dr. Toups said. So, try to minimize as much of the stresses that we can. I kind of go back to the psychological concept of locus of control, which is what is it that I can individually control in this situation? I can't control what's going to happen. I can't control whether I'm gonna get the virus, but what I can do is I can implement control measures that would protect me from that. I can control my own behavior. So it kind of goes back to that, and I remind myself of that. And we tend often to get stressed about everything else that's beyond us, and that is not helpful, and it's not going to help our sleep. It's not going to help us perform our work. So trying to minimize that as much as possible, controlling the stressor as much as possible is really the advice that I've been giving.
Right. Good. Well, I think we're probably to the time. Tom, do you have any comments before we thank the three of you and hand it back over to Mark for closing?
Lisa, I would like to reinforce what Dr. Walia said, in that as an organization, one of the things that we can do is create an environment to listen and to allow people to express their concerns and their anxieties. So, there are several peer pilot organizations that exist out there with the major carriers. So, listening and getting people to talk about it is the first step. It gives the organization the opportunity to know how big the problem is, but it also is it's a form of getting it out there. And if you're sitting around and yeah, I really worry about that too. Yeah, I really worry about that too. So that takes away the I'm the only one issue. So that's what I would like to add.
Perfect. And Dr. Toups, last words?
Really, I appreciate being part of this. Like I said, this is near and dear to me. I'm an old safety guy from a long way back, and just really enjoyed the opportunity to be here with everyone today. Thank you very much, everyone, for inviting me.
Well, it was an excellent panel. Thank you all, and we certainly hope that you'll join us again in the future. We wish you well. Mark, would you like to proceed?
Yes, thank you so much. That was a wonderful conversation. And I would also like to invite Dr. Hassan Shahidi back as we close out this session. We're very happy with the results, the audience questions. There were far more questions than we could possibly get tackled today. Some of you have asked, and I think Lisa answered this, we will have the recording up on YouTube and our YouTube channel. Please look for it. But we also would like to thank our sponsors, Air Care International, Gulfstream, Advanced Aircrew Academy, Polaris Aero, and Quality Resources LLC. Each of them came forward and helped to make this possible today. Really appreciate that. And as always, we're doing this in partnership with the NBAA. Hassan?
Gotta unmute first. Well, Mark, I think that today it was very informative, the morning session and certainly the afternoon session with the speakers and the panel and the conversation and especially the audience participation. We've certainly been getting feedback on the chat line, a lot more questions that we could get to, and a lot of comments about the programs and the speakers. So I think that really I do want to thank all of the speakers today for this an outstanding participation and conversation and information sharing. So with that, I know we want to talk about tomorrow a little bit and a few other things, housekeeping items. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Mark.
Yep. So don't forget, tomorrow we've got 2 more sessions. In the morning, we'll talk with keynote speakers Ali Barami and Michael Coelho, who are co-chairs for CAST. Then following them, we'll be talking a little bit with some of the work that's going on really doing the risk assessments on returning to normal and what do you have to plan for. And in the afternoon, we'll look beyond the COVID-19 crisis and what are the safety issues that are going to be with us regardless long after the crisis passes. If you haven't registered for any of those events, please go to flightsafety.org/events. And we look forward to having you with us again at 9:30 tomorrow morning. So take care, be safe, get some sleep and rest and relaxation. And we'll see you tomorrow.
So long.
Thank you, Mark.